Hello, friends. Welcome to Prophetic Worldview. I'm Pastor Benjamin Faircloth, and I have a very, very special guest with me today. I'm really excited about bringing on Brother Michael Snyder. I'm going to real quick just let him say hi, and then I want to kind of set this thing up. Michael, welcome to Prophetic Worldview.
Well, it's great to be with you, Pastor Faircloth. Thank you so much for having me on today. I think we're going to have a really great discussion that people are really going to enjoy today.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's been an amazing 7 years since really the last time we got together. I think it's been that long. And I was contemplating the other day, the Lord spoke to my heart and said, you need to get a hold of Brother Michael and talk to him about this eclipse that's coming up, because we got together 7 years ago here at Ignited Church at a prophetic conference, April the 19th and the 20th of 2017. And that was the first solar eclipse that was coming across. And you had laid it out very prophetically and very powerfully. And one of the things that you said in that particular message there was, after this 2024 eclipse, if America doesn't repent, there will be no America. I don't know if you remember saying that, but it stuck with me the entire time. And I think that's where we are. We're at this convergence point, I believe, the point of no return for America. I believe America has been marked for destruction. And a lot of people are looking at this more, I think, Brother Michael, as an entertainment thing, something to go look at, just not seeing the prophetic significance of it. And so that's why I had you on to talk about it. 7 years fast forward, here we are. It's right at the door. April 8th, I believe, is the exact day. Michael, share with us what you're feeling, what you're seeing in the research you've done, and we'll just let you go, man, and have a great time talking about this.
Well, Pastor Faircloth, I truly believe that this upcoming eclipse and the combination of these two eclipses is so important, and there's so much to talk about. And so I'll try to go slow and try to hit one thing at a time, because there's so much that we have learned, so much since 7 years ago. We first talked about this. Of course, we knew that this other eclipse was coming, and they formed this giant X over America, and all of that. We knew that all the way back then, but now we've learned so much more since that time. And I believe that this is very, very important. So first of all, why are we talking about eclipses? Well, let me pull this up here on my screen so I quote it correctly. But Genesis 1:14, and let me go to the King James Version, and let me read what it says. Genesis 1:14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." And so, Pastor Faircloth, we have from the first chapter of the Bible, the very beginning, God said, hey, I'm creating these great lights in the sky, and they're going to be for signs and seasons and years. But for signs, they're going to be for signs. And we have the sun and the moon God created at that time. And so now these eclipses, they involve in the sun and the moon. Now you go to Luke chapter 21. And then Jesus was talking about the time just before his return, and he specifically warned us. He said, hey, in the days prior to my return, there's going to be signs in the sun and moon and stars. Now for an eclipse, you got to have the sun and the moon. And so, and we don't know exactly what Jesus meant when he was saying that, but what we do know is that we should be watching the heavens and saying, hey, and anticipating that there will be signs. And so we're looking and saying, does this eclipse mean anything? And we don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers sitting here today, but we're trying to be watchmen. We're trying to take a look, and we're trying to figure things out the best we can, because we're all seeing through a glass darkly. And I always tell people, the closer we get to the events of the end times, the more clear they're going to be for all of us. So things are a lot clearer to me than they were 7 years ago. I'm a different person than I was 7 years ago. I'm sure the same is true for all of you. And so we're all trying to get closer to God. We're all trying to figure these things out. We're all trying to figure this out the best that we can. But as I've meditated on these eclipses and studied these things, and I've come to the conclusion that they are important enough that I put them on the cover of my most recent book entitled Chaos. So they're right on the paths of these eclipses are right on the cover of my book, because I believe that God is trying to tell us something. And
Yes.
so let's go back 7 years, and let's go back to the eclipse of 2017. Um, because that was very important. It crossed from it was called the Great American Eclipse of 2017. Crossed from hit the path of the eclipse, started at the west coast of the United States, went all the way across to the east coast, and it was also known as the Seven Salem eclipse because it actually crossed over 7 cities in the United States, 7 locations called Salem, which Salem being short for Jerusalem. So some called it the 7 Salem eclipse, and I found that to be very interesting.
Yes.
Interestingly, now though, now we've got the Great American Eclipse of 2024 kind of coming from the opposite direction. It's going to come and it's going to enter the United States, the path of this eclipse. It's going to enter the United States in Texas. And interestingly, out of more than 19,000 cities, villages, towns, communities in the United States, the very first one that the path of this eclipse is going to hit is Eagle Pass, Texas. Now, Pastor Faircloth, that should ring a bell because, of course, Eagle Pass, Texas is kind of the epicenter of this controversy over immigration between the state governments and the federal government, and so much there's a microscope. So many news stories are being written about Eagle Pass, Texas. But that's the first community that's being hit, which I think is very, very interesting.
Yes.
Then, as it goes over Texas, it's also going to hit the community of Jonah, Texas, which is very, very interesting. But then beyond that, as it travels along, it's actually going to cross over 7 locations in the United States and an 8th in Canada, but 7 locations inside the United States called Nineveh, which is, very, very kind of ominous, right? Because,
Definitely.
we read about Nineveh in the Bible, and Jonah went and preached in Nineveh and they repented, but then later on, Nineveh fell back into sin and ultimately they were destroyed and they were judged. But it's interesting that this eclipse goes over Jonah, Texas, and then, 7 locations called Nineveh. But interestingly, you go back to the days of Jonah, and of course, he went and preached to Nineveh, and they repented at that time. But scientists have discovered that there was actually a solar eclipse at that time, about that time, and we don't know for sure if it was right before Jonah went to Nineveh or at the same time, or what the exact timing was, but it was right about that time. So scholars have speculated, could it be possible that eclipse was part of the confirmation of the preaching of Jonah? Jonah preached to them, and there was also this fearful sight in the heavens that said, and then the people said, hey, we've got to repent, there's a sign in the heavens. And this prophet is preaching to us. We don't know for sure, but I think that's very, very interesting that kind of may have happened, and now it's happening in our time, in our day. And so we've got these 2 eclipses now. If you put them on a map, and I believe when I spoke at Ignited Church all those years ago, I put a map up on the screen. But if people want to see the map today, I've included it in my recent articles about the eclipses, or if you could just go to Google and type in X over America, with the eclipses, you should be able to find this map. But I have this map in my articles on my websites. But these 2 eclipses, if you put the Great American Eclipse of 2017 on a map, along with the path of the Great American Eclipse of 2024, they form a giant X over America.
Right.
And people say, well, how rare would something like this be? Well, it's pretty rare, Pastor Faircloth, because if you stood on one place on Earth and just stood still and didn't move, you would get to experience a total solar eclipse every 360 years. if you
Wow.
stood just in one place on Earth. So it's rare if you're just standing in one place to get to experience a solar eclipse. But then an intersection where you have two solar eclipses come together in one location, that's very rare. Okay, where they cross, where there's an intersection. So we see this intersection, which is going to happen right over the heartland of America. And this giant X over America will be finished on April 8th. Now, Pastor Faircloth, let me ask you a question for a moment so you can kind of jump in, because I've got lots more to share about this. But let me ask you a question really quick.
Sure.
If you mark a giant X over something, what does that signify, or what could that mean? Or, just in your daily life, if you've got something and you're putting a giant X over something, what would that typically mean?
Yeah, X marks the spot.
Yeah, X marks the spot, or something is finished, something is completed,
It's over.
crossing something off a list.
Yep.
Or you're putting an X over something because it's bad. Usually, it doesn't have a real positive connotation.
Right.
Usually it kind of has a negative connotation. Although, like you said, X marks the spot. That could mean that, okay, here something's going to happen, or this is where you need to be looking. And so it's very, very interesting that this X, and let's talk about exactly, well, before I get to that, let me kind of talk a little bit more about some of the incredible coincidences regarding these eclipses, because you have the path of the Great American Eclipse of 2017 touched 14 different US states, and that was an all-time record for a total solar eclipse in terms of the number of states it touches. And now the next one here in 2024, it will touch 15 different states. And so it'll set a new all-time record, and we're not going to have another total solar eclipse in the United States till 2044.
That's right.
So for some people out there, this would be the last chance, even if Jesus doesn't return, whatever. But I believe Jesus is coming back. But the point is, another total solar eclipse is not going to happen until 2044. So I mean, this is a rare event. We're being told it's going to be the most watched astronomical event in all of U.S. history. Wow. In terms of the number of people viewing it with their own eyes, the number of people tuning in to view it. It's going to be a really big deal. There's going to be headlines all over the nation, a really, really big deal, just like the Great American Eclipse of 2017 was. But this Great American Eclipse of 2024 will actually cross over all three nations in North America: Mexico, the United States, and Canada. Now, the last time a total solar eclipse went over all three land masses, you have to go all the way back to 664 AD to find the last time a total solar eclipse went over all three land masses. And then it won't happen again when a total solar eclipse crosses over all three land masses until 2316 that year. So this is pretty remarkable of how this is happening. Now, something else remarkable about all this is happening on April 8th, okay? And Pastor Faircloth, when the sun goes down on April 8th, in Jerusalem, when the sun goes down on April 8th, the first day of the first month on the biblical calendar will begin. And of course, Israel is ahead of us in terms of time zones. So when this eclipse is happening in the United States and crossing over, the sun will have just set in Israel. The first day of the first month will have begun on God's calendar, commencing a new cycle. And that is when this eclipse is going to be crossing over America and completing this giant X over America. Now, the exact location, Pastor Faircloth, where this epicenter, where the intersection of the two eclipses happens, is in southern Illinois, and it's right there on top of the New Madrid fault zone.
Mercy.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk about that.
And I talked a bit about that back
Yeah.
when I believe when I spoke at Ignited Church 7 years ago.
Yeah.
But what I didn't realize at the time, what we've learned since then, is that similar things happened before. There was an eclipse in 1806, another eclipse in 1811, formed a giant X over America, not in the exact location we're talking about today, but still in the New Madrid area,
Right.
kind of the Indiana area. But there were the two eclipses, 1806, 1811. And then 3 months after the second eclipse in 1811, a series of earthquakes began. A series of 4 gigantic earthquakes started along the New Madrid Fault, which were the largest and strongest earthquakes in the entire history of the continental United States.
That's right.
And they were so strong, the Mississippi River ran backwards, rang church bells in Washington, D.C., and just caused catastrophic destruction, although that area of the country was not highly populated like it is today. But it was just horrible, horrible earthquakes along the New Madrid Fault 3 months after that X was formed in that area of the country. So we kind of have a precedent now. Now, I want to make it very clear to people out there, I'm not expecting any specific events or to happen on April 8th or any other particular day. So if we get to April 8th, there's speculation on the internet about this could happen, that could happen. I'm not expecting any particular event to happen on that particular day. But what we do have is a precedent before, where we had an X over America, New Madrid Fault Zone, and then subsequently at some later time, 3 months later, then the series of earthquakes began. So that's very, very interesting. It may be a prophetic foreshadowing for our time potentially, because as I've covered in my books, as I covered in Lost Prophecies of the Future of America, as I believe I talked about when I came down to United Church 7 years ago, that God has been showing his people for decades, for a long, 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 long time, that someday there will be a cataclysmic earthquake along the New Madrid Fault Zone in the center of our country, which will physically divide North America in two. And in particular, it will be so catastrophic, it will create a new body of water stretching from the Great Lakes all the way down, all the way from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, literally dividing the United States of America in half physically. And now I believe there will be more than one earthquake. So it may not be the first New Madrid earthquake that fully creates this new body of water, but ultimately there will be this new body of water created. Our land will be physically divided. And what people have been shown time after time after time after time in supernatural experiences with God, where they've been shown this with their own eyes, they've been told that the Lord has told them, because you have divided my land, I will divide your land. And they're shown that when the United States is involved in physically dividing the land of Israel, then this great catastrophe, the physical dividing of the United States, will happen to us. And so it's very ominous that right now, Pastor Faircloth, we've been talking about this for so many years, but the Biden administration, along with the Saudis, they're pushing so hard. They're saying, Israel, we've got to have a Palestinian state. Now is the time. Now, in the conclusion of this war, that's got to be the final result. We've got to have a Palestinian state. You wanted to say something there?
Oh no, I'm agreeing. I'm want to shout and run around the church grounds here, because that's exactly what I was going to tell you. They've been talking about it just recently.
Yeah, this is very much in the news right now. It's been constantly in the news in 2024, and I believe ultimately this war in the Middle East, I believe it's going to get really bad. It's going to be horrible, and I believe this is one of the 3 wars of the apocalypse. A giant war in the Middle East, war with Russia, war with China, and 2 of them have already begun. And I don't know why more people aren't waking up. More people in the church. Why aren't they waking up? Because these wars of the apocalypse, we've been warning about, that God's people have been warning about prophetically for so long. 2 of them have actually already started, but still most are asleep. But that's another subject we can talk about more if you want. But we should get back to this eclipse. But yeah, I believe this war in the Middle East, the outcome of it will be the dividing of the land of Israel. I believe that will be the sequence.
Yes.
And once that happens, there'll be now be nothing holding back the giant cataclysm in the middle of the country. Now, we don't know how quickly it will happen. I mean, we have seen other times when the U.S. has done things to divide the land of Israel, and there have been judgments very quickly after that. But in terms
Yeah.
of what happens along the New Madrid, we don't know if it'll be days or weeks or months or years. Probably not. We don't have too many years left, but we don't know the exact timing. But we know one comes before the other.
Hmm.
Just like we knew we were waiting for, John Paul Jackson had seen that a storm like a hurricane or with the strength of a hurricane, a devastating storm would happen in California before the big one would come to California. And so all these years we've been waiting for that storm, that terrible storm to come to California, and we've seen, California get hit massively,
Yes.
recently, not too long ago. And so I believe the thing that must happen before the big one has been fulfilled. Now, we don't know how soon the big one will come, but all these years we said, well, that big storm hasn't hit California yet, so the big earthquake can't happen yet. So God will often set things that have to happen one before another. So in this case, before the New Madrid, we've got to have that formal dividing of the land of Israel. So that's what we're watching for and trying to understand these things the very best that we can. But interestingly, Pastor Faircloth, you look at that intersection in southern Illinois, right on the New Madrid fault, where we're talking about. Now, where the two eclipses where they intersect is in southern Illinois, and in particularly it's in the town of Maconda, just south of Carbondale. And interestingly, the path, the place where the totality of the eclipse will last the longest for 2017 and 2024 just happens to take place at the place where they intersect, which is very, very interesting, because the totality of the eclipse is not equal in time all along the path of the eclipse, but the place in 2017 where the totality of the eclipse lasted the longest and where it will last the longest in 2024 just happens to be at this exact place where they intersect in southern Illinois, which is pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. But this particular area of southern Illinois is known as Little Egypt. For 200 years, it's been known as Little Egypt, and the local sports teams are named after that theme and everything, and cities and communities in that area are named after it, and no one knows exactly why it's called Little Egypt. But today you've got the town of Cairo there. It's on a peninsula where the Ohio River meets the Mississippi, and it's so many things about it. It's been known as Little Egypt for a very, very long time in that particular area. And so they got me thinking that the people of Egypt, I'm sorry, the people of Israel were in Egypt for 400 years, and then God brought them out with an Exodus. Now you look at the United States, the Mayflower came just slightly over 400 years ago. So we've also had our 400-year cycle, if you will. And now is God saying something about an Exodus, or now that our time is ending, or that judgment is coming, just like judgment came in Egypt after 400 years? That's a very interesting question. I don't have the answers, but I just thought that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, another thing, in this particular area, there's a very small area of the country. There is a cross. It's 111 feet high, Pastor Faircloth, 111 feet high. And it's known as the Bald Knob Cross of Peace. In fact, it used to be the tallest cross in the entire Western Hemisphere. Now you have this cross, which is crossing right above this giant white cross, which is one of the tallest in the world. Used to be the tallest in the entire Western Hemisphere. There's this giant white cross which is right at this intersection of the two eclipses. And see, I didn't know this 7 years ago. So much of
Yeah,
we've learned so much more
yeah, yeah.
than I shared with your church 7 years ago, Pastor Faircloth.
Yeah, go on, man. I'm enjoying every moment of it. That's why the Holy Ghost had you come on. He's like, hey, there's so much, there's a plethora of information. And let me just interject. I believe these are all warnings. I believe these are all signs, warnings, omens, whatever you want to call them, as it said in Genesis 1:14. And I personally believe, I want to get your take on it. I don't want to cut you off your stream there, but uh again, I think this is the final warning. I think this is it. This is for America to see it. There's too many, coincidences. I just believe it's signs and wonders to get us looking up and looking inwardly, really, at where we are as a nation. And what do you think? And I want you to go back to this great research you're doing, but I had to interject that. Do you think this is our final warning? Do you feel like this is what it is?
Well, I think it is another warning. I think
Yeah,
it is a sign. I think it's a warning, and it's coming at I believe I felt so strongly about 2024 as
yeah,
because we're seeing a confluence of events where we've got the most chaotic, I believe it'll be the most chaotic election in our entire history.
yeah,
And I believe the result of the election will set the stage for even more chaos. So we've got the political chaos in this country, which will reach a crescendo in 2024 and beyond. Then we've at the time when these wars, which we've been preaching about, when I preached about war with China, war with Russia, a decade ago or even
yeah.
before that, people thought I was
Mm,
nuts. But
mm,
now these wars are all coming together now here in 2024. And, natural disasters, pestilences, all these things were a confluence of events, economic troubles that, where the CNN says we're in the worst global food crisis in modern history right now, and it continues to get worse, more people falling into hunger. And so all these things we've been expecting are starting to come together. And so I believe we're on the verge of incredible chaos. And I believe that the fact that it is happening on the first day of the first month on the biblical calendar in the spring, uh, I think it's marking the year, the biblical year, which begins in the spring. I think it's marking this threshold of time that we're moving into. So I agree with you very much. The remarks you made there. I believe it is a warning. Like I said, I don't expect any specific event to happen
right,
on April 8th itself. We may go through that day and nothing may happen other than the eclipse. It may, because oftentimes if God's sending a warning, it's because the warning comes before what's going to happen next. So if
right.
this is a warning, that doesn't mean God sends a warning and then something happens that day, but the
Right.
warning comes and then the consequences, if the warning is not heeded, follow. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do believe that it is a warning, a major warning. So if people want to look up the cross that I just mentioned, it's called the Bald Knob Cross of Peace in Southern Illinois. Um, and it's specifically located in Alto Pass, Illinois. And it's 111 feet tall. They've got a great
Wow.
article about it on Wikipedia if you want to look into the history of that cross and everything all about it. But it's pretty remarkable. But I want to talk a bit more about the intersections of the eclipses because there's more to talk about.
Amen.
But Pastor Faircloth, we've also learned, since I talked at Ignited Church 7 years ago, about what else is going to be going on in the heavens as this eclipse of 2024, the Great American Eclipse of 2024, crosses over our country. And so let me talk about that a bit because this was discovered by a friend of ours, and you may be familiar with her actually, Rachel Baxter. But she discovered that some incredible things are going to be happening in the skies, in the heavens. In particular, she discovered that looking out from the east from Jerusalem on April 8th, there will be an incredible lining up in the heavens. Now, it's not a typical planetary alignment, where a planetary alignment is when you're looking out for Earth, from Earth, all the planets seem to be, or several of the planets appear to be at the same spot in the sky, lining up behind one another. So they all kind of come together in one giant dot in the sky. That's not what we're talking about. But what Rachel Baxter found is that they're actually going to line up in a straight line in the sky, where all of the other 7 planets in our solar system, all the other 7 planets, along with the sun and the moon, looking out from the east from Jerusalem on April 8th, they will line up in a straight line in the sky, which is pretty remarkable. So Rachel Baxter typed this into ChatGPT, and she said, well, ChatGPT, tell me how rare this would be that all 7 planets and the sun and the moon would all form a straight line in the sky. And she was told it was a 1 in 19 million year event for the 7 planets. And then you add in the sun and the moon, and it's a 1 in 32 million year event. Wow. So as all this other stuff is happening on Earth, we have this strange lining up of the planets in the sky, extremely, extremely rare event for them to form a straight line like that in the sky. So it's, and this is something that can't be faked or manipulated, because ultimately God orders the heavens. And so this is another indication that God is trying to tell us something with this really strange and odd lining up of the planets. So have I missed anything you wanted me to touch on so far, Pastor Benjamin? I want to make sure I don't leave anything out here.
No, I think our audience is absolutely loving it. It's so much information to digest, and just, do what you're doing, take your time on it. I think it's absolutely amazing. I do want to say this, if I understand correctly, the Jewish scholars believe that the lunar eclipse was more for the ominous signs of Jerusalem, but the solar was for the nation, the pagan nations, Gentile nations. So this is for us exclusively, isn't it?
Well, that's what they believe. They believe that the solar eclipse is a judgment on the nations, which I think is very interesting. But let me take this one step deeper in terms of the patterns. Because if you look at the giant X over America, and I talked about this last time I was there at Ignited Church 7 years ago, but if you also look at it in terms of the intersection of the eclipses, it resembles a tav, not in modern Hebrew, because modern Hebrew has evolved and changed over the centuries, but in Paleo Hebrew, the kind of Hebrew that was used back when the Old Testament was being written, this X over America also resembles a tav, which is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet, okay? And now, if you also throw in the Ring of Fire eclipse that happened in October 2023, and you add that to the map, and then you look at all 3, the Great American Eclipse of 2017, the Great American Eclipse of 2024, and the Ring of Fire eclipse that just happened in October 2023, all 3 of those eclipses, you look at that and you're like, wow, what? And a lot of people pointed out that forms what looks perfectly like a Paleo Hebrew aleph, not a modern aleph, which is changed over the centuries, but an aleph in Paleo Hebrew. Now, and people look at that and say, hey, that kind of looks like an A, and ultimately at the ancient Hebrew aleph is where RA comes from, where the first letter in alphabets all over the world came from, is from the Paleo Hebrew aleph, which then the Phoenicians picked up and popularized and spread to Greece and ultimately spread all over the world. So we've got the aleph, the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet, which will be completed on April 8th. And we've got the Tav, which is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet, which will be completed on April 8th. Now, the Aleph and the Tav. A lot of people don't understand the significance of that, but the Aleph Tav is actually in your Bible thousands of times, but hardly ever translated in our English versions. But it's very, very significant. And in fact, well, it's all throughout the Old Testament scriptures, but I believe that it's also referenced in the book of Revelation. You know, it's because we have Jesus, right? In the book of Revelation, he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, right? The first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. He says it at the beginning of the book of Revelation and at the end, at the very end. So he repeats it, so it's got to be very, very important. And so the Alpha and Omega are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. But I believe that when Jesus came to speak with John in the book of Revelation, when Jesus was talking with John, when they were running around on earth with the disciples and Jesus was having his earthly ministry, they weren't speaking to each other in Greek. They were speaking in Hebrew. They were Jewish people. They were speaking to one another in Hebrew. You know, and John didn't speak Greek. He didn't write Greek. He was a Jewish person. He spoke Hebrew. And now when Jesus appears to people in our time, when Jesus comes and if Jesus appeared today and spoke with you, he wouldn't be speaking in Greek or Hebrew. He'd probably speak to you in English because that's what you understand. Right, Pastor Faircloth? You know, or if Jesus appears to someone in China, he speaks Chinese, right? Because he wants them to understand what he's saying. I believe when Jesus appeared to John in the book of Revelation, I believe that Jesus spoke to John in Hebrew, that it was a conversation in Hebrew. And so I believe that when Jesus spoke to John there, that he didn't say, I'm the Alpha and the Omega. I believe that Jesus actually said, I am the Aleph and the Tav. And it was a conversation in Hebrew. It was a first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And I believe that Jesus was referring back to all these times in the Old Testament in which, for example, take the very first verse of the Bible. Okay, there's an Aleph Tav in the first verse of the Bible. And see, there's 7 Hebrew words in the first verse, very first verse of the Bible. Only 6 of them are translated into English. The fourth word, the Aleph Tav, is not translated. And there's all kinds of reasons why scholars do that. And I go over that in my book, but it's never translated. So I never even knew it was there. All growing up, I never knew it was there. But we read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But right in the middle, the fourth word is the Aleph Tav. Which Jesus in the book of Revelation says, I am the Aleph Tav. And so Jesus was saying in the end of the book of Revelation, he was saying, I was there from the very beginning. I am the Aleph Tav. I was there at creation. I was there in the very first book of the very first verse of the Bible. And actually, if you look at it, I believe all throughout Scripture, we see God's 7,000-year plan for humanity. And we see sets of 4 and sets of 7, and the number 4 represents Messiah, because I believe that Messiah came in the 4th millennium of all of human history, the 4th day, right at the end of the 4th day of human history. And then we had the 5th day and the 6th day, which we're in now. And then Jesus comes in. The 7th day is the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ from Jerusalem for 1,000 years. This is what early church fathers wrote about this extensively. They believe this. There'd be 7,000 years, 6,000 years, and then Messiah would reign for the day of the Lord, the last day. The millennial reign for 1,000 years. That's the 7th day. Just as God created the world in 6 days, then there's a 7th day of peace, of rest. And so we see it in the 7 days of creation as well. But we also see it in the very first verse in the Bible. There's 7 words. The 4th word in ancient Hebrew is the Aleph Tav, and that represents Messiah. And that's because he would come on the 4th day of human history. You know, I know I'm getting in kind of deep here, but
go for it.
It's so remarkable that the word that represents Messiah is the 4th word out of the 7. And so we see God's 7,000-year plan for humanity prophetically revealed actually in the first verse of the Bible from the very beginning, which I think is super cool. But and in my book, I go how it's also reflected in the days of creation. It's reflected in the temple menorah. You know, God has told us from the beginning, in so many ways, and we're always going deeper on this. But then the Aleph Tav is also thousands more times, literally thousands of times, more times throughout the Old Testament, but we don't see it in our English Bibles because it's not translated for us. But Jesus is saying, I'm the Aleph Tav. I was there on every page of the Old Testament. I've been there from the very beginning. But now, Pastor Faircloth, and this is my point, now, here in 2024, on April 8th, a Tav is being completed on April 8th over America.
That's right.
And Aleph is being completed on April 8th over America. The Aleph Tav, which represents Yeshua, represents Jesus. And Jesus is saying that literally a sign in the heavens, which represents Jesus, is being painted over America, finishing on April 8th. On the first day of the first month of the biblical calendar, as all these things are happening, as all these signs in the heavens are happening, it's like God is screaming at us, hey, Jesus is coming back. I'm literally putting this sign in the heavens that represents Jesus.
Yeah.
And hardly anyone's talking about it.